Hello everyone, I am the Midnight Narrator. I know you use this video to fall asleep to, so before that, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Close your eyes and let the sound of the ocean carry you away. Tonight, I'll tell you the story of Beacon Point Lighthouse, where the boundary between the living and the dead grows thin with each passing tide. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The rain had been falling for 3 days when Marcus Sullivan first saw the lighthouse. Through the passenger window of the rickety bus, he watched as Beacon Point emerged from the mist like something from another century. The lighthouse stood sentinel on the rocky outcrop, its white tower gleaming despite the gray afternoon light. Marcus pressed his face closer to the glass. After 23 years in the city, the isolation felt both terrifying and liberating. The bus lurched to a stop at the small village of Millhaven, where weathered fishermen's cottages lined the harbor like crooked teeth. "End of the line," called the driver, a grizzled man whose eyes held the weight of too many storms. Marcus gathered his single duffel bag and stepped into the salt-tinged air. The village seemed suspended in time, with cobblestone streets that had felt the footsteps of generations. A few locals watched him with curious eyes, their faces carved by wind and sea. The harbor master, a woman named Sarah Chen, approached with a knowing smile. "You must be the new keeper," she said, her voice carrying the musical cadence of someone who'd spent her life near the water. "I'm Sarah. I'll be taking you out to the point." They walked toward a small motorboat bobbing at the dock. The engine coughed to life, and soon they were cutting through the choppy waters. The lighthouse grew larger as they approached, its base disappearing into a foundation of black granite that had stood against the Atlantic for over 150 years. "The previous keeper," Sarah called over the engine noise. "Old Henrik Larsson. He lived here for 37 years. Found him in his chair one morning, peaceful as you please, staring out at the horizon." She paused, studying Marcus's face. "Some say he's still watching." The boat pulled up to a small dock carved into the rock. Marcus could see the lighthouse up close now, its tower rising 90 feet into the gray sky. The keeper's quarters were built into the base, with windows that looked out over the endless expanse of ocean. The lighthouse automated in 1987, Sarah explained as they climbed the worn stone steps. "But the Coast Guard keeps a keeper here for maintenance and emergency response. Plus, the old girl seems to run better with someone living in her shadow." She handed him a heavy brass key. "Henrik's belongings are still inside. His nephew said you could keep whatever you wanted, donate the rest." Her eyes grew distant. He was a good man, Henrik. Saved more lives than he could count. The sea took his wife 40 years ago, but he never left this place. As the boat's engine faded into the distance, Marcus stood alone on the rocky outcrop. The lighthouse loomed above him, its light not yet activated for the evening. He could hear the waves below, their rhythm constant and hypnotic, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient. The keeper's quarters were larger than he'd expected, with thick stone walls and windows that rattled gently in the wind. Henrik's possessions were scattered throughout. Maritime charts, weather instruments, shelves lined with books about the sea. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and wind-blown hair. Marcus set down his bag and walked to the window. The ocean stretched endlessly before him, its surface broken only by the occasional white cap. Somewhere out there, ships passed in the night, their crews trusting in the beacon that would soon be his responsibility. As evening approached, he climbed the spiral staircase to the lamp room. The Fresnel lens caught the last rays of sunlight, fracturing them into rainbows that danced across the walls. Henrik had left detailed instructions, written in careful script: when to light the beacon, how to adjust for weather, emergency procedures. At the bottom of the notes, in different ink, someone had written, "The sea remembers everything. Listen carefully, and it will tell you its secrets." That first night, as Marcus lay in Henrik's bed, he heard the lighthouse settling around him. The building seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the waves, expanding and contracting like living tissue. Somewhere in the walls, he could hear what sounded like footsteps, though he knew he was alone. Chapter 2. The Patterns. Marcus fell into a routine during his first week at Beacon Point. Each morning, he would wake before dawn and climb to the lamp room to extinguish the beacon. The sunrise over the Atlantic was different every day, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and gold that no photograph could capture. After breakfast, he would walk the perimeter of the lighthouse, checking for storm damage and monitoring the weather equipment. The rocky outcrop was larger than it appeared from the mainland, with hidden pools and caves that revealed themselves at low tide. It was during one of these morning walks that Marcus first noticed the patterns. At the base of the lighthouse, carved into the granite foundation, were symbols that seemed too deliberate to be natural weathering. They reminded him of nautical charts, with curved lines and intersecting marks that suggested depth and distance. He mentioned them to Sarah during her weekly supply run. She studied the carvings with interest, running her weathered fingers over the grooves. "Henrik never mentioned these," she said thoughtfully. But then, he wasn't much for sharing mysteries. She looked up at Marcus. "The lighthouse has been here since 1847. Built after the merchant ship Cassandra ran aground in a storm. 12 souls lost that night." That evening, as Marcus prepared to light the beacon, he found himself thinking about the carved symbols. They seemed to shift in the changing light, as if the stone itself was alive. When he mentioned this to the Coast Guard during his daily radio check, the operator chuckled. "Isolation can play tricks on the mind," came the crackling voice. "Henrik used to report strange things too, especially during storms. Nothing to worry about as long as you keep that light burning." But Marcus wasn't imagining things. As the days passed, he began to notice other peculiarities. The lighthouse's foghorn would sound on clear nights when no fog was present. The beacon would flicker in patterns that seemed almost like Morse code, though he couldn't decipher any message. Most unsettling were the footsteps. Every night, around midnight, he would hear the distinctive sound of someone climbing the spiral staircase to the lamp room. The steps were slow and deliberate, pausing at each landing as if the climber needed to rest. On the 10th night, Marcus decided to investigate. He waited until the footsteps began, then crept to the base of the staircase with a flashlight. The sounds continued above him, metal boots on metal stairs. But when he climbed to the lamp room, he found it empty. The beacon continued its slow rotation, casting light across the water in its eternal pattern. But something was different. The light seemed dimmer, and in the lens itself, Marcus could swear he saw the reflection of a figure standing behind him. He spun around, but the lamp room was empty, except for the machinery and his own shadow. When he looked back at the lens, the reflection was gone, but the light had returned to its normal intensity. Sleep came fitfully that night. Marcus dreamed of storms and shipwrecks, of voices calling from the darkness of the ocean. In his dream, he stood in the lamp room, but he wasn't alone. An older man with a white beard and kind eyes stood beside him, adjusting the beacon's focus. "The light must always shine," the man said in a voice like distant thunder. "The sea takes enough without our help." Marcus woke with a taste of salt on his lips and the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below. The lighthouse was quiet, but outside his window, he could see that the tide had risen higher than usual, lapping at the base of the tower. On his bedside table, where he was certain he'd left it empty, sat a glass of water. The water was ice cold and tasted of the deep ocean. Chapter 3. The Logbook. 2 weeks into his tenure, Marcus discovered Henrik's personal logbook hidden behind a loose stone in the lighthouse's foundation. The leather-bound journal was filled with decades of entries, written in the same careful script as the lighthouse instructions. The early entries were mundane: weather observations, maintenance notes, the occasional mention of passing ships. But as Marcus read deeper, the tone began to change. Henrik had started documenting strange occurrences. Ships that appeared on the horizon but never reached port. Lights beneath the water that pulsed in rhythm with the beacon. Voices carried on the wind during storms. One entry, dated 15 years ago, caught Marcus's attention. "The woman in the photograph spoke to me again tonight. She stands by the window, watching the water, waiting for something that will never come. I told her Thomas isn't coming back, that the sea took him 40 years ago. But she just smiles and continues her vigil. I think she knows something I don't." Marcus looked up at the photograph on the mantel. The woman's eyes seemed to follow him as he moved around the room, her expression both patient and infinitely sad. According to the date on the back, the picture was taken in 1952, shortly before Henrik's wife disappeared during a storm. As he continued reading, Marcus learned that Henrik had developed a theory about the lighthouse. He believed that the beacon didn't just guide ships to safety. It served as a conduit between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The lighthouse, built on a foundation of tragedy, had become a gathering place for those lost to the sea. The lighthouse remembers every soul that has passed through its light, Henrik had written. They come here seeking passage, seeking closure, seeking the peace that the ocean denied them. As keeper, I am not just tending a light. I am shepherding the dead. The entries grew more detailed as Henrik aged. He described full conversations with spirits, their stories of final voyages and last words. He wrote about the carved symbols at the lighthouse's base, which he believed were a map of the spirit world beneath the waves. One entry, dated just months before Henrik's death, sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "The new keeper will come soon. I can feel it in my bones, the way sailors feel storms before they reach the horizon. The lighthouse is calling to him, just as it called to me all those years ago. I must prepare him, but I fear I will not have the chance to speak to him while I still draw breath. The sea has been patient, but my time is running short." That night, Marcus climbed to the lamp room with new purpose. As he lit the beacon, he whispered to the empty air, "Henrik, if you're here, I need to understand. What am I supposed to do?" The lighthouse was quiet, except for the usual sounds of wind and waves. But as Marcus descended the staircase, he noticed something that made his heart race. Wet footprints, unmistakably human, led from the entrance to the base of the tower and up the first few steps. He followed the trail, his flashlight beam revealing each clear impression in the dust. The footprints stopped at the landing where Henrik's personal belongings were stored. There, on a small table, lay an old maritime chart that Marcus had never seen before. The chart showed the waters around Beacon Point in extraordinary detail, with depth markings and current patterns that seemed to shift as he watched. But more intriguing were the annotations in Henrik's handwriting. Coordinates, dates, and names that corresponded to the spirits mentioned in the logbook. At the bottom of the chart, in fresh ink that glistened in the lamplight, someone had written, "The lighthouse is yours now. Tend it well and listen to the sea. It has much to teach you." Marcus looked around the empty room, his skin prickling with the sensation of being watched. "Henrik?" he called softly. The response came not as a voice, but as a sudden dimming of the beacon above. 3 long flashes, 3 short, 3 long again. SOS in the international distress signal. Then the light returned to normal, leaving Marcus alone with the chart and the growing certainty that his role as lighthouse keeper involved responsibilities he was only beginning to understand. Chapter 4. The Storm. The storm arrived on Marcus's 3rd week at Beacon Point, announced by a barometric pressure drop that made his ears pop and set his teeth on edge. The weather service had predicted rough seas, but the tempest that descended on the lighthouse was beyond anything their instruments could measure. Marcus spent the day securing equipment and checking the beacon's backup systems. The automated foghorn had been sounding continuously since dawn, its mournful voice barely audible above the growing wind. By evening, waves 20 feet high were crashing against the lighthouse's foundation, sending spray halfway up the tower. As darkness fell, the real storm began. Lightning split the sky in jagged purple lines, illuminating the churning water in brief, terrifying glimpses. The lighthouse shook with each thunderclap, its thick walls transmitting the vibrations through the stone and into Marcus's bone. He had climbed to the lamp room to check the beacon when he saw it, a ship's light, impossibly close to the rocks, struggling against the current that wanted to dash it to pieces. Marcus grabbed the radio, calling the Coast Guard, but static was the only response. The ship was an old fishing vessel, its hull low in the water and its engine clearly failing. Through the storm, Marcus could see figures on deck, their faces pale with terror as they fought to keep their vessel from being driven onto the rocks. Without thinking, Marcus began adjusting the beacon, using the powerful light to signal a safe passage around the outcrop. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, painting a path through the chaos. The ship's captain seemed to understand, turning his vessel to follow the light. For 20 minutes, Marcus guided the ship through the treacherous waters, his hands steady on the beacon controls, despite the fear that gripped his heart. The vessel passed safely around the point and disappeared into the darkness, heading for the sheltered harbor of Millhaven. As the immediate crisis passed, Marcus became aware that he was not alone in the lamp room. A figure stood beside him, translucent in the beacon's glow, wearing the yellow rain gear of a fisherman. The spirit's face was weathered and kind, with eyes that held the wisdom of the sea. "Well done," the spirit said, his voice carrying the sound of distant waves. "Henrik would be proud." Marcus found his voice. "Who are you?" "Captain Thomas Chen," the spirit replied. "Sarah's father. Been watching these waters for 30 years, since the storm took my boat and crew." He gestured toward the beacon. "The light calls to us, gives us purpose. We guide the living as we failed to guide ourselves." Around them, the lamp room began to fill with other figures. Men and women in maritime clothing from different eras, their faces bearing the marks of lives lived on the water. Some were recent, wearing modern gear, while others were clearly from the lighthouse's earliest days. "Every keeper learns the truth eventually," said a woman in a Victorian dress, her hair arranged in an old-fashioned style. "The lighthouse serves two masters, the living who need safe passage, and the dead who seek redemption." Marcus looked around at the assembled spirits, no longer afraid. "What do you need from me?" "Simply to keep the light burning," said Captain Chen. "When storms come, we gather here, adding our strength to the beacon. The living world sees only the light, but we see the souls it carries." Throughout the night, as the storm raged around the lighthouse, Marcus worked alongside the spirits. They shared stories of their final voyages, spoke of loved ones left behind, and helped him understand the deeper purpose of his calling. The beacon burned brighter than ever, its light visible for miles across the turbulent sea. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a crystal-clear sky and waters that sparkled like diamonds. The spirits faded with the morning light, but their presence lingered in the lamp room like the scent of salt and seaweed. Marcus descended to the keeper's quarters, exhausted but exhilarated. On the radio, he heard the Coast Guard coordinating a search for survivors from a fishing vessel that had gone missing during the storm. The vessel had been found safe in Millhaven Harbor, its crew reporting that they had been guided to safety by the lighthouse beacon. But Marcus knew the truth. It wasn't just his hands that had guided that ship. It was the combined effort of everyone who had ever called Beacon Point home, living and dead, working together to preserve life in the face of the sea's eternal hunger. Chapter 5. The Understanding. As autumn deepened, Marcus settled into his role as more than just a lighthouse keeper. He was a guardian of the threshold between worlds, a shepherd of souls who had found peace in service to the living. The routine of his days remained the same: maintaining equipment, monitoring weather, lighting the beacon each evening. But now he understood the true scope of his responsibilities. The spirits came to him regularly now, no longer hiding their presence. They would appear at moments of greatest need. During storms, when ships passed dangerously close to the rocks, or when the beacon required adjustments that only experience could provide. Each spirit had their own story, their own reason for remaining tethered to Beacon Point. There was Margaret Holloway, who had been the lighthouse keeper's daughter in 1887. She had drowned trying to rescue a sailor from a shipwreck. And now she helped Marcus identify vessels in distress. Her knowledge of tides and currents was invaluable during rough weather. Samuel Torres, a merchant marine from the 1940s, had been lost when his ship was torpedoed during the war. He possessed an uncanny ability to predict weather patterns, often warning Marcus hours before the meteorological equipment detected approaching storms. And there was little Emily Larson, Henrik's granddaughter, who had fallen from the rocks during a family visit in 1963. She appeared to Marcus as a child of 7. Her presence a gentle reminder that the sea claimed innocence as well as those who made their living on the water. But it was Henrik himself who became Marcus's most frequent companion. The old keeper would appear each evening as Marcus climbed to the lamp room, offering guidance and sharing the accumulated wisdom of his decades at Beacon Point. "The lighthouse is alive," Henrik explained one night as they watched the beacon sweep across the dark water. "It feeds on the stories of those who pass through its light. Every ship that finds safe harbor, every life that's saved, adds to its strength." Marcus had come to understand that the carved symbols at the lighthouse's base were indeed a map, but not of the ocean floor. They represented the spiritual geography of Beacon Point, showing the paths that souls took between this world and the next. The lighthouse stood at the intersection of these paths, its light serving as a beacon for both the living and the dead. "But why do you stay?" Marcus asked. "Why not move on to whatever comes after?" Henrik's expression grew thoughtful. "Some of us choose to remain, to serve as guardians for others. The sea has taken much from us, but it has also given us purpose. We are the lighthouse's memory, its conscience, its heart." As winter approached, Marcus began to notice changes in himself. His eyesight grew sharper, able to spot ships on the horizon long before they appeared on radar. His hearing became more acute, picking up distress calls carried on the wind. Most remarkably, he found he could sense the presence of the dead wherever they gathered. On particularly quiet nights, he would see them walking on the water, spirits of those lost at sea making their way toward the lighthouse. They came from all directions, drawn by the beacon's light like moths to a flame. Some would join the permanent residents of Beacon Point, while others would simply pass through, finding the peace they needed to continue their journey. One evening, as Marcus tended the beacon, he heard a familiar sound, a boat's engine struggling against rough seas. But when he looked through the lamp room's windows, he saw no vessel on the horizon. The sound grew louder, more desperate, and then he understood. The spirits were showing him an echo of the past, a ship that had been lost to these waters decades ago. As the phantom vessel approached the rocks, Marcus adjusted the beacon just as he would for a living ship, guiding it safely around the point. The ghostly engine sound faded, replaced by a sense of profound gratitude that seemed to emanate from the sea itself. "Another soul finds peace," Henrik said, appearing beside him in the lamp room. "The lighthouse's true purpose is not just to prevent tragedies, but to heal the wounds left by those that couldn't be prevented." Marcus nodded, understanding now why Henrik had spent 37 years at Beacon Point. The isolation wasn't a burden. It was a privilege. To serve as a bridge between worlds, to offer redemption to those who had lost their way, to keep the light burning for both the living and the dead. As snow began to fall outside the lamp room windows, covering the rocky outcrop in a blanket of pristine white, Marcus felt a deep sense of belonging. He was no longer just a man who had fled the city in search of solitude. He was the keeper of Beacon Point, guardian of the threshold, shepherd of souls. The lighthouse beam swept across the winter sea, its light carrying the hopes of the living and the peace of the dead into the endless night. Chapter 6. The Legacy. Spring returned to Beacon Point with the gentleness of an old friend. The harsh winter had tested both the lighthouse and its keeper, but both had endured. Marcus now moved through his duties with the confidence of someone who truly understood his calling. The spirits had become his companions, their presence as natural as the sound of waves against the rocks. It was during this peaceful season that Sarah Chen brought unexpected news. A research team from the Maritime Museum wanted to study the lighthouse's history, particularly the unexplained phenomena that had been reported over the decades. They're calling it a paranormal investigation, Sarah said with a wry smile, though I suspect they'll find more than they bargained for. Marcus felt a protective instinct rise within him. The lighthouse's secrets weren't meant for academic study or sensationalized documentation. They were sacred, a trust passed down from keeper to keeper across the generations. That evening, as he discussed the situation with Henrik, the old keeper nodded thoughtfully. Every lighthouse faces this choice eventually, he said, whether to reveal its mysteries or keep them hidden. The decision is yours, Marcus. But remember, some truths are meant for those who serve, not those who merely observe. The research team arrived the following week. 3 academics with expensive equipment and skeptical expressions. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a folklorist from the university, led the group. She was particularly interested in the carved symbols at the lighthouse's base, which she believed might be Native American in origin. Marcus guided them through the lighthouse, sharing the official history while carefully omitting the supernatural elements. The team set up their instruments in the lamp room, hoping to capture evidence of the ghostly footsteps and unexplained lights that had been reported over the years. As night fell, Marcus prepared for what he knew would be a difficult evening. The spirits were aware of the intruders, their presence agitated by the electronic equipment and clinical approach to their sacred space. Henrik appeared beside him as he lit the beacon. "They mean no harm," Marcus said, trying to calm the restless energy that filled the lighthouse. "They're just trying to understand." "Understanding cannot be forced," Henrik replied. "It must be earned through service, through sacrifice, through love of the sea and all who depend on it." The research team worked through the night, their instruments detecting temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic anomalies that they couldn't explain. Dr. Morrison became increasingly excited as her equipment registered what appeared to be intelligent responses to her questions. But the spirits remained hidden, their presence felt but not seen. Marcus realized they were testing the researchers, waiting to see if these newcomers possessed the respect and reverence necessary to witness the lighthouse's true nature. Near dawn, as the researchers prepared to pack their equipment, a thick fog rolled in from the sea. Within minutes, visibility dropped to 0, and the lighthouse's foghorn began its mournful song. Over the radio came a distress call. A small yacht had lost its GPS in the fog and was drifting dangerously close to the rocks. Marcus sprang into action, adjusting the beacon to cut through the mist. The researchers watched in fascination as he seemed to communicate with unseen helpers, his movements guided by knowledge that couldn't be found in any manual. As the yacht's engine grew louder, Dr. Morrison's instruments began registering massive electromagnetic disturbances. Through the fog, she could see what appeared to be multiple figures moving around the lamp room, their forms translucent but unmistakably human. "My God," she whispered, "they're really here." For the next hour, Marcus worked with the spirits to guide the lost yacht to safety. The researchers watched in amazement as the lighthouse seemed to come alive, its beam moving with purpose and precision that defied explanation. When the yacht finally reached the safety of Millhaven Harbor, the fog lifted as suddenly as it had arrived. In the sudden clarity of dawn, Dr. Morrison found herself face to face with Henrik Larsson. The old keeper smiled at her with infinite kindness, his form solid enough to cast a shadow in the morning light. The lighthouse chooses its friends carefully, Henrik said. Those who seek to exploit its mysteries find only empty rooms and dead equipment. But those who come with respect and wonder, they are given a glimpse of the eternal. The research team left Beacon Point that morning with a new understanding of their mission. Dr. Morrison would later publish a paper on the lighthouse's unique atmospheric properties, carefully avoiding any mention of the supernatural. But she would return many times over the years, not as a researcher, but as a friend, bringing supplies and companionship to the keeper. As summer arrived, Marcus reflected on the changes the lighthouse had brought to his life. He no longer felt isolated or alone. The spirits were his neighbors, the sea his constant companion, the light his sacred trust. Ships passed safely through the waters around Beacon Point, their crews unaware of the ghostly guardians who watched over them. One evening, as Marcus tended the beacon, he noticed a young woman standing on the rocks below. She was solid, clearly living, but there was something familiar about her that made his heart skip. As she climbed the path to the lighthouse, he recognized her from Henrik's photographs. The same kind eyes, the same gentle smile. "I'm Anna Chen," she said when she reached the door. "Sarah's daughter. I've been accepted to the Coast Guard Academy, and I wanted to see the lighthouse before I leave for training." Marcus invited her in, and as they talked, he realized that Anna possessed the same sensitivity to the lighthouse's mysteries that he had discovered in himself. She could sense the spirit's presence, could feel the weight of history that surrounded Beacon Point. "The lighthouse is calling to you," Henrik said, appearing beside them as they stood in the lamp room. "Just as it called to Marcus, just as it called to me. The sea chooses its servants carefully." Anna nodded, understanding without needing explanation. "I'll come back," she said. "When my service is complete, I'll come back to help." As she prepared to leave, Marcus handed her a small piece of sea glass that had been polished smooth by decades of waves. "A reminder," he said. "The lighthouse will be here when you're ready." Standing in the lamp room as the sun set over the Atlantic, Marcus felt the continuity of his calling. The lighthouse would endure, its light would continue to shine, and there would always be those willing to serve as guardians of the threshold between worlds. The beacon swept across the darkening water, carrying with it the hopes of the living and the peace of the dead. And Marcus smiled, knowing that he was part of something larger than himself, something eternal and beautiful and true. The sea remembers everything, and the lighthouse remembers too. In the interplay of light and shadow, of past and present, of the living and the dead, the eternal dance continues. And so the light burns on, through storm and calm, through seasons and years, tended by those who understand that some services transcend the boundaries between worlds. The lighthouse keeper's tale is never truly finished. It simply passes from one guardian to the next, like the light itself, eternal and ever-changing, forever pointing the way home. The sound of waves continues softly as the story ends, fading gradually to silence.